Hello and welcome to the SDGs podcast about sustainability. In this episode, we had a very interesting exchange with Prabhakar, who's one of our good colleagues on SDG2 on no hunger. Prabhakar knows a lot about adaptation, food and agriculture and how they are linked. During our discussion, we talked about the challenges to achieve a world free from hunger while trying to reduce fossil fuel use to limit climate change. It seems the world is producing enough food, or has potential to do so, but that distribution, access and sustainability of production remain a problem. We also found that it'll be challenging to produce food for 8 billion people on the planet without degrading lands and soils, and without food production and transport contributing to climate change. Some of the possible solutions going forward, which we discussed, include organic agriculture, technology, land and seed ownership, and genetically modified organisms or GMOs. There is no silver bullet solution to eradicate world hunger, but there are various promising approaches. Please join us and listen to this episode. Welcome everybody to the 11th episode of the SDGs podcast about sustainability. Today with us we have a good colleague, Prabhakar. And Prabhakar has been with SDGs for several years, and he has a lot of experience on climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. But he's also worked on conservation farming and done crop simulation modeling and all kinds of things related to food and food security. And that's why we have him on today, because today's episode is going to be about SDG2 on no hunger, on the whole food question. So that's what we'd like to discuss. My name is Simon, and with me I have my two co-hosts, Erin and Andre. So welcome everybody. Prabhakar, what is in your view the current situation with world hunger? Can you say a little bit about whether we are on track to meet SDG2 by the end date of 2030 or not? I mean, where are we?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Simon, and other co-hosts for this opportunity. So basically, if you look at world hunger, we are nowhere near to achieving the 2030 target, the zero hunger. I think until 2015, the world hunger trends look a little bit very satisfactory, but then afterwards, the trends are completely against our favor. The world hunger again started increasing substantially. Maybe because of a lot of factors. Some of them are within our hands because we were fighting among each other, a lot of wars, internal conflict, and also related to fuel prices, as well as climate change and natural disasters. So it's not one reason. Many factors are contributing to it. While governments are continue to fight against the hunger, it's not that they stopped fighting for it, but these other factors, they overpowered our efforts. So most recently, we have seen the COVID-19. Of course, COVID-19 has affected not just the health of the people, but also the agriculture production systems, as well as the supply systems, supply chains globally. And most recently, we have seen Ukraine war as well, war between Russia and Ukraine that is affecting the global food security to a large extent. So going by these trends, we are by far missing the target. I haven't seen any projections by how many years we have missed the target. It's not that even before these things happened, we are about to meet the target, but then these new developments have made it really difficult for us to meet the target. Yeah.
Right. The UN said in 2021, that was before Ukraine, I suppose, the number of people affected by hunger globally rose to as many as 828 million in 2021. So 828 million, that's almost 1 billion. That's an increase of about 46 million since the previous year, and an increase of 150 million since the outbreak of COVID-19. So as you said, Prabhakar, so COVID-19 caused a backslide on food security, on achieving SDG2, and that has been, you're saying, so it's the pandemic, but it's also conflict that is disrupting this, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Undoubtedly, it's systemically disrupting across the board. It's not only disrupting the international food supply chains, even the local food supply chains are affected because people interaction is affected. We can't go to markets to procure food. Food is not available at the same cost before the COVID crisis, COVID-19. Food prices have substantially increased, not only because of the limited access, but also because of the increase in food fuel prices. So the transportation costs have increased substantially, and poor are the most affected because of the COVID-19. So if you look at the responses of the national governments to COVID-19, it's not just the physical isolation. They have spent millions of dollars on providing cheap food and free food to the most vulnerable sections of the countries. For example, you look at the government of India, it boasts that it could able to feed nearly hundreds of millions of people, additional to what the government has already been providing through its public distribution systems during the COVID-19. And these interventions have been widely acclaimed, both by the WF, World Health Organization, and many other developed nations as well. The ability of the government to mobilize the resources and reach out to the most poor to meet their food requirements or nutrition requirements. There are estimates that in absence of these supplies or the by the government, the food security would have been reduced by minimum 15 to 20%. Population will become more food insecure.
Okay, so do you mean that the support provided by the governments, your example, Indian government, that support provided has really taken the brunt of this food insecurity disaster,
yes.
and it has helped where crucial help was needed.
Yes.
It is not like hunger and food insecurity was not a problem before the pandemic or before the Ukraine war. It has been a problem, and I'm wondering, no hunger or working towards reducing food insecurity, that was a goal under the Millennium Development Goals, and it is SDG2 under the Sustainable Development Goals. So it seems that hunger has been this persistent development challenge for a long time. The pandemic has made it worse, and the war is making it worse, and other factors we might get into is making it worse, but it's not like it wasn't a problem before. Why is it that we can't just tackle this very fundamental problem?
Yes, that's a very good question. This is the same question you can say for the poverty as well. The poverty has been there for ages, and why we have not been able to tackle the poverty? Because of our governance systems, the resources that are available for the countries. There are a lot of factors that are intermingled, and where do we start? It's like a chicken and egg dilemma, for me at least, for such a complex problem. But why the food security and hunger has been such a problem? Let us dwell into that. First of all, food hunger is not just a end user problem. If it is just food is available in the market, it's not accessible, then that okay, you just give money to the people, they can buy, and or maybe you can provide the food cheaply to the poor. But the problem is much more complex than that. You have areas where you can't access physical food at all. Food is not available. For a major part of the human history, food availability has been a problem. Okay, before Green Revolution, for example, we used to have major famines. We don't have any famines today because we have come across, we have overcome the problem of the food quantity of the food problem.
Sorry, now, just before, what is the Green Revolution? Can you briefly describe what that is? Yeah.
Okay, so before 1950s and 60s, the food production used to rely upon low input agriculture and also rely upon crop varieties that don't respond to external inputs like fertilizers and pesticides and irrigation. So because these are not improved varieties, the productivity of these crops are very low. For example, rice used to produce maximum 300 kgs, 500 kgs per hectare. That's the amount of the yield that we are talking pre-green revolution era. And what happened was during 1960s and late 50s, there is a influx of new varieties, high yielding varieties, which are dwarf in nature, and they are also highly responsive to external inputs like irrigation, basically importantly the fertilizers, and they can be grown very near to each other. So the spacing between the plant can be very close compared to the traditional varieties which grow very large. So they need a larger spacing. So you can't grow too much crop in a per unit area. So the unit area intensification has increased. So with that, we could able to produce much more. Now, if you look at rice yields, on average, we are producing 2.6, 2.7 tons. But if you look at the maximum yields, you can see areas where even farmers are producing 10 tons, 8 tons per hectare. So that is several multiple folds in productivity per unit area with the Green Revolution. So with the Green Revolution, we have overcome the production problem and quantity problem. We don't have no more a quantity problem. Now what we have is the inequality problem. We have haves and have-nots, and the poverty is highly linked with food security as well, hunger. And because of this, probably we'll come to the discussion later, the linkages between different, SDGs. The way the poverty is defined earlier, even today in most parts of the world, is the amount of food expenditure that you spend for your basic needs, and the important basic need is the food. And even today, many countries don't consider many other requirements, like in your energy requirement, your residential requirement, your transportation, whatnot, your education and things like that. So the food is considered as the most important element. Probably 60%, 70% of the expenditure is considered to be food. So because of that, there's a high linkages with the poverty, and our inability to bring out the people from poverty has led to inequality and as well as limited access to the food that is available in the market.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe we can say a little bit about different forms of agricultural production or different approaches to agriculture. There are a couple of approaches, right? There's intensive agriculture and extensive agriculture, and you talked about before the Green Revolution. It was, I suppose, non-intensive agriculture. So these are different approaches to food production, but in different areas of the world, there are different approaches to food production and agriculture. But despite that, we have not yet been able to eliminate the hunger problem, right?
Yeah. So going back to the same point that I made earlier, we are no more talking about the quantity problem in most parts of the world. Only in parts of the Africa and in some parts of Asia, probably the quantity of the food is a problem. And if you look at the global scale, we have enough food to feed the millions. It's only geographical distribution problem. It's a supply problem. It's a market imperfection problem, as well as the access problem, the economic in terms of the ability to purchase the food in the market. Okay, just keep it at that point. That's for sure is there. That is addressed. The second point is whether we want an extensive farming or intensive farming, and which is good for the hunger, to mitigate the hunger. I would say that, of course, I have not come up with, we can do a lot of back of the envelope calculations that if an extensive farming can produce this much of agriculture and this much of the food, how many people can it feed? We can do that calculation. And maybe we can say with the, current global, resource boundaries that we are talking about, probably extensive agriculture is not the solution, because once we talk about extensive agriculture, even there is a lot of competitive use of the land for urbanization, expansion of the population, industrialization, and also we have very limited land to expand, because a lot of land is already degraded and the pristine lands are no more available, unless otherwise you want to cut down the pristine forests and convert them into agriculture, and that is a sustainability problem.
Can you just define extensive agriculture and intensive agriculture? Because it's not that obvious.
The extensive agriculture is we are not take example of you want to produce 10 tons per hectare. Okay, 10 tons of food. Okay, and right now we are producing 1 ton from your whatever the geographical area you have in question, and in order to produce 10 tons, you are simply expanding the area of agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So that is extensive agriculture. So, I mean, if you are talking at the household level, I can't expand the land, because if I have to expand the land, then I need to buy the land. Then I need to have the resources to buy the land. And there should be somebody who is willing to sell the land, So those complications comes into picture.
So it's simply production per unit area. Is it as simple as that, or is that an oversimplification of the definition?
I think, so basically, when we want to expand our production, we are simply looking at the solution of expanding the area of agriculture. Okay. But on the intensive agriculture side, we are not looking at as much of expansion of the land itself, but more about intensification within the land that we already have at hand. So that means that, for example, as I said, in the Green Revolution, what we did was basically intensification. We brought more number of plants that can be planted within the unit area, and we increased those plants' ability to uptake the nutrients at higher rate. So those are highly fertilizer responsive, input responsive varieties. So they can harvest much more solar radiation, because it's all about agriculture is about harvesting solar radiation. So either you expand your land so that you harvest more solar radiation in that way, or you expand the intensity of the crop within the unit area, and so that you increase the surface area of the crop, so that you can increase the solar radiation capture, and ultimately your productivity goes up in the unit area. But that's not the problem. The intensification and extensification are not the problem by concepts themselves. The problem is what have the pathways that we have taken for intensification, and what are the pathways that we have taken for extensification. Of course, the land is always coming from forests. There is no, the original land is always forest. If you look at even before human civilization.
Or natural vegetation of some
natural
kind.
Vegetation, right? Forests and all that.
Yeah.
So the way we expanded is, of course, I don't know where at any point of our horizontal expansion of agriculture, we ever thought about, we are doing wrong by cutting down forests. It's only much later in Johannesburg Plan of Action and other environmental revolution globally that happened, that we started
So in the
thinking,
last couple of decades.
The last couple of decades, that we had started thinking about, our forests are important and we should be cutting the forests, because they have a lot of other services and products that can offer to the world beyond just being sitting plants, trees there. That is one problem. The second problem is intensification. How are we intensifying? We are intensifying by depending on fossil fuels, because you need to produce a lot of fertilizers, and many of these fertilizer production is highly energy intensive. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is leading to GHG gas emissions. That is one thing. The second aspect is we are bringing a lot of fertilizers into the land without thinking about balanced nutrient application. And by that, we are spoiling the soil and its a chemical composition, its a physical properties. So slowly the soil started degrading, development of the salinization and acidification and whatnot. And also in many places, of course, because we have high yielding varieties, but we are not applying in a balanced fertilization. So we are also over depleting the soils as well in other parts of the world. Yeah.
So Prabhakar, so you're saying, by explaining the different approaches to food production, intensive and extensive, when you say extensive, I get to think about those huge pastures of fields in the United States where the farmer needs to get into his or her helicopter to check the boundaries of the field. That's the types of areas we are thinking about when we talk about extensive agriculture. But where I'm from in Europe, there are no such big fields. And when we get closer to Asia and Japan, the fields become even smaller because the amount of land is constrained. So we need different approaches. But no matter what, you're saying that there are limitations to those approaches to agriculture. As you're saying, we destroy the forest, we remove carbon sinks, we deplete the soil. So that means if we should meet SDG2, that means if we should eliminate hunger by the current approaches to agriculture, we would cause setbacks in other important sustainability areas, such as climate change or, SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and whatnot. So then if those approaches don't work, so what do we do?
Okay, so now we have come to the question of whether or not can we feed the world without having to do extensification or intensification. Of course, we can do that. And there is a lot of research that says that we can do it in a sustainable manner. Recently, I have seen a paper draft authored by Professor Rosenzweig. The others have listed several ways that we can do. Let me go beyond the others, what others have said. Just looking at the what you call the basket of solutions that we have in front of us, right away we can look at the geographical regions of the world where we have already drastically affected the agriculture productivity, where the total factor productivity is coming down. Okay, so we can look at these areas and we can try to improve the sustainability in these areas, try to introduce environmentally best practices, including organic agriculture or a balanced nutrification, or using organic fertilizers and pesticides, even if you don't want to call them organic agriculture. And we can make these soils, sustainable over the period. Okay, that kind of approach we can take in this particular area. In other areas, we haven't even reached the tipping point that other areas have reached. For example, many parts of Africa, the input in agriculture is very, very far below the global average. So we have higher potential to increase food productivity there, while still being within the environmental boundaries that the environment can allow us, the nature can allow us. So this is the kind of multi-pronged and also very location-specific approach we can take within the available agriculture land that we have. Beyond that, I think, there are several approaches. For example, we are talking about climate smart agriculture, where we can take the opportunities that climate change is providing. Because of the warming, new areas are coming into, agriculture production that we can think of vertically as well as horizontally. And secondly, also, we can also think about mitigating the impacts of climate change, including the disasters, because every year, natural disasters like floods, typhoons, and droughts, they affect agriculture production substantially. I keep on taking the example of India, wherein in 2004 and 2005 drought, that has affected the rice production so much that the country took nearly 6 years to revive to the level of the pre-drought agriculture production. Okay, so even though the monsoon has revived immediately, we have seen that the farmers are so much affected with one drought because they don't have seeds, they don't have fertilizers, they don't have access to these market inputs, they don't have money to invest because they have already lost the money in the investments that they have made in the 2004 and 5 crops. So the debt that the farmers have and even the governments to respond to the crisis, it took a lot of time. So if you could address these kind of shocks, the annual shocks that we face every time, I think we can save a lot of food that is lost even before it is reaching the markets. And if you talk about the entire life cycle of the food from the farm to the plate, you can think about a lot of food losses in I think in the food processing facilities, for example, in the storage as well as in the home consumption. So if we can arrest all these losses, including one of the solutions that Rosenzweig and her colleagues have suggested, there is a lot of opportunity for us to meet the food sustainability as well as food security goals, even without harming the environment. And we don't need to necessarily talk about converting the entire world agriculture into organic agriculture at all.
Yeah. but some areas would be good.
Yeah, you need to look, pick and choose the areas which are necessary candidates for organic agriculture. The recent example that has become a candidate for a negative example for organic agriculture is Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, that's it's a conglomeration of many factors. Of course, we can't just attribute to organic agriculture itself, but we need to look into a prudent way of employing organic agriculture.
Right. Yeah. So what you're talking about is also sort of the whole energy calculation, input output. You have implied that before a few minutes ago. That we need to reduce the energy input to the calorie input to the calorie output that we get from foods. Otherwise, those calories all just comes through fossil fuels. And if we have to, we have to limit global warming or climate change, we need to reduce the use of those fossil fuels. So that necessarily requires, I think, a creative approach to agriculture. If I look at the SDG2 targets, for example, Target 2.3, it talks about doubling the agricultural productivity to improve the incomes of farmers and small-scale food producers and so on. The challenge is going to be, so how do you double the agricultural productivity without using more fossil fuel-based fertilizer, right?
Yeah, wonderful. So let us look at the energy consumption in agriculture right now. So if you look at the fertilizers, the nitrogen fertilizers, usually, for example, nitrogen fertilizers globally, they are produced nearly about, I think in the range of 190 to 200 million tons of ammonia every year. And the major part is produced by China, India, and other countries. The nitrogen
Russia,
fertilizers, yes, they take nearly 30 to 35 gigajoules of energy per ton of ammonia that is produced. Okay. And for the phosphorus fertilizers, we are talking about in the range of 5 gigajoules of energy production. So the agriculture, this fertilizer production is highly energy intensive. However, we cannot blame fertilizers alone. Fertilizers are only one of the inputs for agriculture production. Right. And I was looking at various other energy inputs in agriculture. For example, you take the example of the cotton. Cotton as an input, there are calculations which says that the total input is 29 gigajoules. Okay. You can include fertilizers, fuel that directly you consume on the farm because you want to pump the water, you want to spray some fertilizers, things like that. You want to till the land, you want to use a tractor. For all that, you need direct gasoline consumption on the farm. If you convert the cotton output, that is producing 56 gigajoules. Okay, so the ratio is for every gigajoules of the input, you are producing 1.93 gigajoules of the output in the case of the cotton. So that is pretty much.
So that's
positive.
Energy positive.
That is very much positive. So I think when I looked at your question, I thought probably you were implying that are we on the negative side of the energy consumption?
Yes.
And of course, I thought, okay, cotton is on the other extreme, and let me look at sugarcane. Sugarcane is also one of the highly resource intensive crops, but it's the same. It's not the same in the case of the sugarcane. In sugarcane, we are looking at 148 gigajoules per hectare of energy input, whereas the energy output is only 112 gigajoules. So that means, because it's a ratio, we don't say it negative, but it's less than 1. But if you compare between cotton and sugarcane, in cotton, it is mostly the fertilizers that is leading to your energy consumption, whereas in sugarcane it is irrigation water. And you can say the same with in case of the rice, it is fertilizers, but we can't really generalize these things because it depends on under what production systems you are estimating these inputs and outputs. Okay, so if you look at the organic agriculture, organic agriculture does not define non-use of the fossil fuels, please mind. So an organic farmer can still use a tractor, he still use gasoline used blower for spraying, biopesticides, biofertilizers and things like that. So he's still dependent upon the fossil fuels for his organic agriculture. In that case, you can say that it is much more. The ratio is much more towards on the higher side, above 1. But in many other crops, it could be much below. Now, so having understood that particular equation now, let us come to the question of how can we produce the same amount of food while not investing the same amount of the energy. Okay, so why are we investing so much of energy? We are investing so much of energy because we want to make sure we want to capture as much of solar radiation as possible. And the limitation is biological to begin with. So for example, in agriculture, we talk about C3 crops and C4 crops. So C3 crops are, in general, they are efficient in conversion of solar radiation compared to C4 crops. So that relative differences are there. So we don't have many C4 crops. We have many C3 crops. Basically, we are dependent on C4 crops. And how do we, increase the efficiency of the C4 crops to capture more solar radiation in an efficient manner? And we are talking about, in this case, probably the carbon dioxide fertilization and things like that, which is not yet in a applicable manner. I mean, it's not still widely. You can do that in a greenhouse context, but probably not in a open environment like that we produce rice and wheat and maize in the open fields. Okay, keep that aside. So the second way of increasing the efficiency of energy conversion is relying upon non-fossil fuel sources. For example, governments are already providing solar PV panels to pump the irrigation water for using a lot of on-farm activities. I haven't seen many tractors that can run on solar PVs. They are still on fossil fuels, and I think tillage is one of the energy intensive process, as well as harvesting as well, because we are no more dependent on human labor, because human labor is hard to come by even in developing world. So as long as we can't produce those harvesting machines as well as sowing machines that can use solar radiation or other non-fossil fuel energy, then we will be continuing to at least depend on the fossil fuel for now. So
Prabhakar, so you're explaining that some of the inputs to the energy spreadsheet or the energy calculation in terms of how much energy it requires to grow a crop, some of those we can reduce by, say, relying on solar power instead of fossil fuels or others. But there may be other areas that where we haven't found an alternative yet to increase the efficiency of the conversion. That means either by reducing the energy input or in some other way increasing the efficiency of solar energy conversion of the crop. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
how about the supply chain then?
Okay, so coming to the supply chain, of course, supply chain is completely energy intensive process, depending on from what distance you are talking about. Many urban areas, even in developing world, if I go to India, I see any supermarket, I see a lot of imported food coming from far away countries. This I have not seen 10 years ago, 15 years ago. This is the thing that we have been seeing in Japan. Japan imports nearly 60%, probably, if I'm not wrong, of its calorie consumption coming from outside its boundaries. So import dependency on food is very, very important issue. And unfortunately, these global, I may be diverting a little bit, but the way the food security is estimated comparatively between countries, if you look at Japan, it is estimated to have higher food security compared to countries that are self-sufficient, food self-sufficient. And because, yes, and
that's
that
interesting.
seems to say that because Japan has purchasing power, it's food secure. Of course, theoretically it is right. But then if you talk about supply chains and energy consumption and all that, it's not the case. Energy, I mean, in true sense, Japan is not food secure. And so that's where it is, basically, in terms of how we are employing these different concepts.
I see. To what extent do you think that technology can answer the question, or technology is the answer? Can we innovate ourselves out of the constraint of producing food in a way that has a less impact and that is more efficient, so that we can feed everybody? Can we rely on technology for that, or what do we need?
Oh, just to add on to that, I mean, you didn't mention GMOs at all, but that's kind of a big, trend as well. And
an elephant in the room.
Right. Yeah. So I was wondering as well, what role GMOs have to play.
Yeah. So let me answer the GMOs first, and then let's go to the broader question of the technologies. Of course, similar to organic agriculture, I would say that the jury is still out in terms of the GMOs. Earlier I tried to do a lot of literature review on what is the crux of the GMO problem. Is it really, the health issues, the long-term health issues that is being feared widely, or is the fears are, kind of unfound? I think it's a mixture of the problem. First of all, we don't have the evidence that, to what extent these GMOs can have negative impact on our health on the longer term. Probably we are still not very much far into the GMO food. We don't have much experience so far. And also there are not many longitudinal studies that can systematically isolate, because we are not just living by eating GMO food. We are interacting with the wider environment, facing a lot of other chemicals. So it is very difficult to conduct a systematic study that can isolate the subjects from other chemical influences of the life that they are experiencing. So having said that, I think there are areas that we can, systematically rely upon. For example, nutrient fortification, biofortification we are talking about now, which is a very good area for me, because a lot of nutrients which we consume basically are crops that consume are carbohydrate rich. And because of that, we are deprived of basically some of the essential vitamins. For example, vitamin A and iron is one of the focus areas of the biofortification. And
how would you fortify, and what would be the process of? Do you mean of post-production fortification of?
It is of course. What I mean is by genetically modification. You can enhance the vitamin A content in the crops, but also, of course, after the production, also you can enhance. For example, in developed world, I can think that vitamin D is, for example, is mixed with your milk. Vitamin D fortified milk is being sold in the market, but it is entirely post-production process, as far as my understanding goes.
But you were referring to the GMOs as a way of fortifying, right? Which has been done with vitamin D as well, right?
Yes. So those we can do at least for a targeted population which are highly deprived of these nutrient deficiencies, deprived of these nutrients in parts of Asia and parts of Africa. That could still be a part of your solution arsenal, I would say. But still, we still don't know what is going to be the long-term impact of these, genetically modified organisms. So having said that, about the wider technology, I think the technology cannot be or need not be necessarily the panacea, because a lot of the problem is not related to the production. As I said, your production problem is largely solved in many parts of the world. You can balance the production geographically, but I would say that while we are balancing geographically, that means that we are heavily reliant upon the world food supply chains. So so both of them are like interdependent. Either you dependent on your local agriculture and local food production and think about intensification in other ways, or you think about a geographical balancefication between the areas where there is a high intensification happen. You try to reduce the intensity there and try to increase the intensification in areas which hasn't happened, and try to link these areas in terms of the supply chains. Okay, that is one strategy. The second strategy is, of course, obviously you promote your local farmers, and that obviously has a lot of productivity implications and also the resource implications. For example, we are talking about urban agriculture today. Now, urban areas are already highly energy starved. Even in many metropolitan cities, we see blackouts in parts of Asia, and the water shortage is very much rampant. And if you are bringing agriculture or food production into urban areas, we are actually putting additional pressure on the environment, on the food, on the energy, as well as the water resources. So there is another aspect to be considered. When you want to reduce dependency on the externally produced food, I think we need to be more pragmatic, and we have to be open in our approach. And we can I think I prefer more towards balancefication of intensive areas being targeted to become more sustainable agriculture pathways, and target other less intensified areas to catch up with other agriculture production. Yeah. So because the supply chains are there now, if you agree that, because you and me are the decision makers for the world today, then if you agree that, okay, let's Prabhakar, let us balance the geographical areas, then you will say, maybe somebody else will say, oh, what about supply chains? Because we have already seen supply chain disruption during COVID. And can you guarantee that supply chain disruptions doesn't happen because of the pandemics and wars? Of course, we cannot guarantee. And also, if you look at the debates widely, we are seeing that, the countries, some of the, voices, they are saying that the essential goods and services, they have to be exempt from any disruptions. You can choose, for example, energy, food, they can be exempt from transborder, limitations, especially during the crisis such as war. For example, doctors without boundaries or beyond boundaries, what you say, they can go in the war areas without it being shorted. Isn't it? So if you can put life of the person a priority in the war situation, you can also prioritize the life of the person who is living far away, but dependent upon the resources coming from the conflict zone. Okay, can we think about, World Trade Organization, negotiating between countries to do something like that? Probably it is possible. If you think the human well-being in the front, I think it is possible. So that is one approach to avoid the supply chain disruptions from the human conflicts. But in terms of other conflicts, probably we need to look into more resilient supply chains. I was looking into the India, the food import by India, and you will be surprised that India is importing almost, I think my number, if you allow me to refer my slide, in the case of India, India imports a lot of food as well. And if you look at India case, when we analyzed during 2011 to 2020, 42% of the total food imports came from climatically vulnerable countries, and 29% came from politically unstable countries. So you can think of hunger and food security of countries is no more dependent upon the food production in the country itself, because when we are talking about the geographical balancing, you ought to depend upon the food that is produced outside, and the situation of the countries outside your country is beyond your control. So what we have to do is, and one of the problems with supply chains is they are not organic in nature. They are not as quick in nature as we want them to be, because it takes years of establishing linkages with the new supply chains, and those supply chains cannot be modified in a short notice. Like those that happen in a disaster or a pandemic situation. You see, if you remember, even the milk that is produced within a country had to be thrown out because many milk producers are producing for the restaurants, and restaurants are closed, and because they can't pack the milk for consumers, because the consumers they only buy 1 liter, 2 liter milk packs. But restaurants, they buy, in tens of liters packs, probably the quantity. So you don't have the packing. Even you can't think about repacking of existing goods for quickly targeting the consumer base within the country. So you can't really talk about establishing a new supply chain in the event of a food loss somewhere else because of a disaster or because of a war. So we need to think about mapping alternative supply chains as a strategy by the individual countries and try to have forward agreements with those countries. Okay, we are already dependent on these sources traditionally, but our risk analysis says that we can no more dependent upon these traditional sources, and we want to have an agreement with you for food supply or any other kind of supply chains realignment in the wake of a disruption. Probably this is not the exact way you do, but I'm just saying in a colloquial terms, and you need to have that kind of agreement with multiple countries and multiple supply chain providers, service providers in between. Yeah.
So I like what you're saying, Prabhakar. You're laying it out basically as sort of there are different options. There is no panacea. There's no silver bullet. But one of them in the future, as you're saying, will be to try to get to remove the trade or the supply chains of food commodities of food. To reduce the risk related to conflict and political instability, basically saying that these items or sectors should be somehow protected, or there should be an international agreement that whenever, if unfortunately there is a political conflict, those necessities should be beyond the conflict.
So because the problem is not the quantity, the problem is about the access to the quantity, and the access is only by paying money. So the volatility of the food prices is a major issue. Food prices are affected by many things. If you look at the 2008 global food prices, food price crisis, you will be surprised to know that there are things happening across the world which seem to be not linked with each other at all. But at the end of the day, we have seen that the rice price have increased so much, the wheat prices have increased so much because the drought in Australia, and somewhere the land is converted away from agriculture, food, and somewhere the people are investing in food markets because the financial markets were down. So the investors found the agriculture and food markets as a lucrative area to invest. So because of all these seemingly unrelated factors, we have seen that the food security of the millions of the people in developing world were severely affected.
Right.
So we couldn't forecast that in 2008, and I am not sure whether we can forecast the same even today.
Right.
Though the agencies like FAO and I think even to some extent IFRP, they have tried to come up with a food price forecasting facility. I'm not sure to what extent they could able to succeed in that, and also to what extent it can really warn you before such a food price crisis happens.
Prabhakar, what's the IFRP?
International Food Policy Research Institute. IFPR.
Okay, I see. Okay, IFPR. My bad. Okay, and so, but another issue is like sometimes, as you also said, sometimes the political stability or instability or whatever crisis might happen if it's a drought or a fire, that is beyond the control of an international agreement, or sometimes there is no fertile ground for an international agreement. So in those cases, where possible, it makes sense perhaps in the future to relocalize some of the food production in order to reduce the risk of long supply chains being disrupted.
I'm not denying that we should entirely dependent upon externally produced food. I'm saying that in the scenario of you and me agreeing that geographical redistribution is a good strategy for the world, then we have to make sure that our supply chains are sacrosanctic. They are not affected. They are not touched by any human factors. And we make sure that there is a sufficient redundancy and sufficient resiliency built into the supply chains so that they are not affected. They are not affecting the food security of the millions of the people. But I'm not saying that that's the only approach. We can also think about food storage, because a lot of food loss is also from the lack of food storage. On-farm food storage doesn't exist in many developing world. Farmers, they have to harvest today, and in many cases they have to immediately shift it to the markets overnight. And because of the lack of marketing storage facilities, sometimes you see gloom and glut. I think that's gloom and glut is a kind of cycle, where all the farmers come to the harvest at the same time, and you have to sell it. Especially it happens in the case of the fresh produce like vegetables and fruits, and you need to sell them because of the high supply and low demand. You are selling at even lower than the production cost. And in many parts of Asia, you will see during the gloom period, during the glut period, you will see that a lot of agriculture produce is thrown in the agriculture fields itself, because it's not profitable for farmers to take them to fields. So we need to promote cooperative, at least at the cooperative level, some kind of cold storage facilities, so that farmers can store the food produce, so that they can enjoy constant food prices over the period of time. And also we can avoid the food losses, more importantly. And also, secondly, the more important distinction between a developed country farmer and developing country farmer is the ability to process the food on the farm itself. If you look at the developed country farmers, they are able to process a lot of food produce on their farm itself. But it's not the case with the developing country farmers. Even at the village or a group of village level, we don't have local food processing facilities sufficient enough to meet the demand. I think there are estimates that says that only 1% of the total food is processed in the developing world, which is very, very low. And there is a lot of potential. I think this is where the private sector can come in. They can invest in different models, cost sharing model, things like that. And this problem can be solved in a sustainable manner.
By food processing, do you mean like packaging, or like what do you mean exactly by that?
It's not just only the packaging, because once you harvest the food, food undergoes a lot of post-harvest operations, including quality, maintenance of the quality. You want to segregate the food into different quality standards. Also, you want to polish in the case of the rice. Also, you want to convert into other value added goods. For example, tomato puree, canned tomatoes and things like that.
Right. So instead of selling or instead of selling sugar cane, you might have a facility that actually makes the sugar, and maybe there could be some byproducts of that production that can also go back into the energy cycle. So
that's right.
There are some good ideas there. But you mentioned food loss and storage facilities as also some things that I feel are part of the answer for how to tackle the hunger problem. Yeah. But food loss, actually, interestingly, global food loss and waste, I don't have I didn't pull up the data, but I think that it's substantive. There's a lot of food loss, but food loss is tackled under SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production. There's a target 12.3 to halve per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels between 2015 and 2030. But I think I'm not sure where we are with this, but I think there's still some ways to go.
No, of course, we are nowhere in limiting our food loss. Of course, this point comes back to the interlinkages between SDGs. Obviously, hunger is very much linked to with many other SDGs, SDG 5, SDG 1, for example, SDG on climate change. You have life on land, life below land. And of course, as you said, sustainable consumption production. All these SDGs are highly linked with hunger. But coming to your food loss, there is a UNEP report that says that nearly 30% of the total food globally is lost. That's a lot of amount. And even if I say that if you can arrest that 30% itself, you can straight away address your food access problem. That's possible. You don't have to even bring additional land into intensive agriculture itself. Of course, I'm not saying it out of a robust analysis, but by looking at sheer quantity of the food, 30% amount itself is, to me, appears to be very sufficient to feed, additional 500 million people or 600 million people.
So, and it seems also just It seems also a bad business idea to lose 30% of your input.
It is a bad business idea.
Unethical as well.
Yeah, it is a bad business idea. It is unethical, and also it is environmentally unsustainable because the food already has received a lot of environmental resources into it. Water has been applied, fertilizers have been used, farmers have invested their financial resources. So it's a total loss.
And what happens to the food that is wasted? Where does it go?
Yeah, so interestingly, that obviously goes into the landfills or the incinerators. But in Japan and also in many developing countries, there are a lot of initiatives, but these all are very grassroots level initiatives. For example, NGOs are collecting used food from 5-star restaurants. They are being supplied to poor people, and also there is a closed loop system. Examples in Japan, for example, where NGOs are promoting collection of the food waste from households, and it is composted and given to the farmers, and they are converting this amount into some kind of units. So those units you can trade in terms of the yens. So for example, if you bring in 1 kg food waste, probably you can get 10 yen, for example. So that's a very innovative, but there has to be some. So from where do you generate that resources? The 10 yen has to come from somewhere. Right. So developing a business model out of such examples is very important, and it can provide a solution as well.
Yeah, maybe you could just reduce the fossil fuel subsidies by 10 yen, and then per unit you have those 10 yen available to help create a business model for something that you just mentioned.
Oh man, where can you put the fossil fuel subsidies? You can put everywhere else. I mean, there are so many competing uses for fossil fuel subsidies, but there is no substitute for a life saved from lack of food. And that is the single most reason why the governments today are going beyond their limits to provide as many subsidies as possible. And this comes to the distorted nature of the world trade in terms of the food. Even SDGs, which I think probably I come to the point where I can criticize one of the aspects of SDGs is that it wants to achieve the hunger without subsidies. It's like you are tying the legs of people and asking them to run, and you are asking them to run by 2030
and run uphill.
So how can you do that? So probably I think though this is a negotiated goal, I'm not sure. Probably countries are optimistic, I would say. Otherwise, they wouldn't be agreeing to that kind of target, to phase away the trade subsidies, export subsidies. But of course, obviously, it is talking about export subsidies, a specific form of subsidy. But in general, we need in developing countries a targeted subsidy at least, so that the food can be made available at an affordable cost to the poorest of the poor.
Kind of just going back a little bit, Prabhakar, since the beginning, I've kind of been wondering about this relationship, and we spoke about it in the previous podcast discussion on SDG1 on poverty. Poverty has come into this discussion quite a bit, and so has inequality. But what I'm curious about is, one thing is that on the SDG2 page, it talks about inequality as being a problem, but it doesn't talk about poverty as being a problem related to hunger, which I found quite strange. But and this kind of gets me back to the whole issue of why, if we are producing enough food, what is the actual mechanism by which that food is not reaching the people it needs to reach? Is it and I think it's too general to say it's poverty or it's inequality, but can you talk, do you have an understanding of what that mechanism is and like why it's not getting to the people it needs to get to?
Like a barrier of some sort.
I think it's purely in terms of the market prices. So your market prices are higher than your affordability of the food, and the poor, they don't have the sufficient income to pay for daily food consumption. How to keep the food prices low is one of the challenges. And if you look at the discussion in this particular area, people say that, okay, don't subsidize the food, let the market forces play out, so that you reach a equilibrium price where your supply and demand, they determine your food prices.
Right.
And then government can chip in and then provide the food that is necessary for the poor, which is anyway the government is already doing. The government is already providing a lot of subsidized food or even free food to the poor through public distribution systems or fair price shops, as in the case of India. So there are, I think, some quantitative studies to make that point. I think the governments are not very, I think, convinced by that idea, because obviously your on the desk studies may not always roll out to be what the market forces, because markets are not always, they don't behave the way that you expect them. There are a lot of inequalities in the market itself. So I think for the governments, it's about implementability of the policy rather than idealness of the policy. So in terms of the implementability, it is easy for them to target certain points of the food production and then provide subsidies there, and then pick up the food from the market at a lower price and give it to the the poor.
Okay.
So that way they are pleasing a lot of their electorate. They are pleasing the farmers because they are subsidizing the inputs, and they are pleasing the poor because they are subsidizing the selling price of the food to them, or even providing the free food.
Okay, but so that all makes sense, but I'm still a bit perplexed, because that what you're saying essentially is that poverty is the reason, and nothing that you've said indicates that there's anything else other than poverty. So if everyone had enough money to buy food, would that solve the problem entirely? Is it purely a poverty issue, or is there more than that?
I mean, simply, I don't have a very deeper understanding on that, but on a simplistic sense, on a surface, to me, it appears that it is the affordability to buy a food. That is the food security. Food security is not just about the quantity, but also the access. And the access is always about the market access. It is about your ability and willingness to pay for the goods and services in the market. And that is always by money. So, for example, as I said earlier, Japan doesn't produce all of its food, but still it is been ranked as one of the food secure countries. There are many countries which are producing more food than they need. So it means that it is the ability of the Japanese consumer to buy the food that is coming from thousands of kilometers far away from its boundaries. So I would apply the same logic even within the boundaries. Of course, I think it's most of the cases, it's about the economic access to the food.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be the case. That's just why I was confused by why they were emphasizing inequality and not poverty. I just thought perhaps that's just a misnomer on the part of the SDG. And this is just one SDG website, so it might not necessarily be in the targets. I don't know them well enough to know about that. I don't know if any of you guys have studied the terminology that they use in the targets.
Yeah, so because you have thrown the light on the inequality, I would also say that SDG on hunger also talks about your sustainable agriculture production. It also talks about, let me go to...
Smallholder farmers, indigenous peoples, family farmers, pastoralists, and fishers.
That's
so on. So there is a social aspect to it. It's not just about market access.
So the smallholder farmers we are talking about because in Asia, majority of the food is produced by smallholder farmers. And what is happening is now food is increasingly getting industrialized. A lot of large players are coming into food production, and the ability to access the food markets is not the same for the big industries as well as the small farmers. So because we need to provide a level playing field, and we because the significance of the smallholder farmers, we want to provide a level playing field even for the smallholder farmers, so that they can access the markets. They can sell their produce at the same ease as the bigger players they can able to sell. So that's the reason I think the hunger recognizes that fact probably, and that's why they specify that we need to make sure that the smallholder farmers are recognized and protected.
You could then also say, I mean, counter to the smallholder farmers, as you indicate, is that I think there's also a trend of concentration of wealth or concentration of land by conglomerates or international farming companies that have their roots in areas way outside of farming. And those are, of course, due to economies of scale, I think they're able to compete much, much better than smallholder farmers. And in reaction to that, at least some of the people that I'm working with from civil society in the region, they are advocating what they call food sovereignty, bring back the sovereignty around food production but also seeds back to the farmers. I think that's an issue maybe also relevant to the inequality question.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the land grabbing by the corporations is a major issue in developing world because to large extent the land tenure rights is a major issue as well as the poor seems to certain extent farming is no more a profitable operation, then farmers may want to move away. So that's the reason why you see that there are this is like a very conflicting issue. There are farmers who are fed up with agriculture and they want to move away by selling their land, but their proportion may be very less. But there are farmers who are for ages they have been farming and they don't know anything else other than farming. They can't part farming and there can't be any other livelihood for them, and for them protecting their land and their rights is an important issue in developing world. So I think this is one of the reasons why largely because of the misunderstanding of the farm bill introduced by the government of India recently, because the farmers thought that it will increase the corporation's role in the agriculture sector, and they agitated against it. Of course, a lot of their fears were misplaced, but of course that's the reason why even when governments want to bring good policies, such fears of corporate domination is stopping farmers from accepting such good policies. So there's a lot of need to educate the farmers on the real situation and also the safeguard their rights. So that's very important.
Okay. So I feel that we, until now, I mean, this has been such a rich exchange and I really appreciate that. But I feel that until now, we have viewed, as it probably is to a large extent, the challenge of food security and eliminating hunger very much as a problem of poverty. That means the people that are poor, they just need some more development and then that'll sort itself out. I mean, to put it very simplistically, but I just want to provoke a little bit or say, but what about the other side of the coin? I mean, aren't there issues related to food security, maybe not so much food security, but quality of nutrition also in what we call the developed world and issues that should be addressed under such an SDG as well, aren't there?
Of course. Before I come to your point of food nutrition, nutrition is a very important part of the food security. I would like to say a couple of things about women's role in food and hunger. If you look at agriculture, nearly I think 60% of the human labor is the total, both men and women. 60% comes from women, but the majority part of the agriculture decisions are made by men in agriculture decisions. Of course, this may vary socially in certain pockets of the countries, depending on the local social context. However, largely this is the case, and hence I think the SDG on hunger also recognizes the women's role and safeguarding their property rights and access to the land and access to agriculture inputs and banks and credits and things like that, so that their role can be increased, because there are studies that says that if you can increase the role of women decision making in agriculture, I think I'm not sure if my number is right. I think it can increase the food access by 10 to 20% or something like that. So it can have very huge impact on the food security of the millions of the people. So that's the point about the role of women and recognition of that. So
that is captured. That is also captured by SDG 2.2 and 2.3, the role of women. Just wanted to point that out. Yeah. Sorry, Andre.
And I was going to say that covers the inequality question in an interesting way as well, because when I was talking about inequality just now, I was thinking between countries rather than, but it's also social, between genders
within countries.
Right? That's right. Yeah. So coming to the malnutrition, I think the major part of the SDG talks about vulnerable sections of the people. It talks about below 5 years age children, lactating women, and also the pregnant women. And there are a lot of statistics which are alarming and says that we have a long way to go in achieving that malnutrition. But, if you say that malnutrition is, in your question, you seem to imply that, it's a developed country problem because probably you are coming from the point of view of obesity in the children. But on the extreme other side of that, you see that, stunted growth and other side of the malnutrition implications in the developing part of the world as well. So how to make access to food to the children? Nutritious food is a major problem, and I can talk from the point of countries like India, where much of my knowledge exists. And you will be surprised, a major part of the food security initiatives in India are targeted at the school children. For example, we have a school midday meals program where all the children are provided nutritious food at the school every day throughout the year. So that actually is targeting the children. And also we have what is called Anganwadi workers and Anganwadi centers that reaches out to rural poor women, children, as well as lactating and pregnant women, and try to address their nutrition problems. And the government of India has also introduced, for example, paying certain cash benefits to the women. If you are lactating or carrying, for example, you are eligible to receive, for example, 6,000 rupees that you can use either to increase your nutrition, or if you are working but you could not work anymore, then you can also compensate your income from that. So a range of policy initiatives are possible. But again, these initiatives are very much dependent upon your economic status of the country. And this is where your inequality picture comes in. How do we arrest the inequality? The major question with developmental arena is how do we arrest the inequality? Then you say that, okay, tax the rich and pay the poor. That's a major approach till today. And that is criticism as well as there are praises on both sides of the coin. But if you see on the positive side, I think the people like these vulnerable people, vulnerable women and children, they are directly getting benefited from such tax collections.
The whole picture ought to be or can be illuminated under the question around food security and eliminating hunger, basically saying that, comparing school meals in India with school meals in the UK or in the US, you might find that some of the school meals that you just gave an example of, they might be of better quality and might be more nutritious, might be less junk food than we see in other so-called developed parts of the world. So that's just what I wanted to throw out there,
I agree. Yeah. So I am actually exposed to some of the information on how the school meals is designed in parts of the developed world and how unhealthy it is. I think the situation is changing. I think, for example, in US with the Obama administration, a lot of efforts have gone in on how to increase the nutrient diversification in the school meals. I think there is a lot of ground to cover, but we are not making beginnings now. The beginnings have already been made, I think. So we only have more ground to cover,
okay.
I think.
Thank you so much, Prabhakar, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to About Sustainability. Please subscribe at podcast.iges.jp or search for About Sustainability wherever you normally get your podcasts. If you've got feedback, you can review us on your podcast directory of choice or reach out on Twitter at IGES_EN. About Sustainability is produced by the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Any views expressed during the podcast are those of the speaker at the time of recording and do not necessarily reflect the views of IGES. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. We don't take that lightly, and we hope you'll join us next time.